Welcome back to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Alan Seslowsky, here with the creator of the world famous PSM single input model. You know him better as Adam Levitan from Establish the Run. What's up, Adam?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, who could not introduce you with your proprietary algorithm first? So that's the best part of what you guys do over there is that you feel loose when you're podcasting. Is that kind of like how Establish the Run got started? I mean, I know you've been out there for a few years now. Just give us a little bit of the background for those who don't know how you started in the fantasy industry.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I was journalism major way back in college. I graduated in 2004, and I always thought I would be a beat writer for a team, and just realized quickly that really wasn't for me. That's like all networking and ass kissing of front office people and stuff like that. And so, I was playing poker and I was playing a lot of fantasy. And it's just I started writing an article for this newspaper, and Greg Rosenthal found it, and I started working at RotoWorld, and then, long story short, kind of left the season-long industry behind for the most part in 2015 to just go full blast into DFS, and that's kind of been what I've been doing ever since.
What was that moment when you realized that, hey, I'm not going to, the corporate umbrella, I loved working for DraftKings. I love working for a RotoWorld, but it's time to go out on our own. What was that moment for you, that entrepreneurial moment?
Yeah, I think you can see pretty clearly how media has changed, where you can go direct to consumer and you don't need a middleman anymore. I don't need someone to tell me I can be on their YouTube channel, or I can need them to help me launch a podcast. Like, everything can be direct to consumer now. And so, it's different for everybody. For me and Evan, we knew we had a pretty big audience already that was pretty dedicated to us. And so there was really no risk. All we were doing was kind of cutting out the third party. And yeah, I mean, obviously, like, when you do your own thing, the downside is going to be greater, but the upside is going to be way greater too. And you're going to realize your actual value, like what the market says your value is. You're going to realize that much better than you would in any type of salaried or hourly job.
And we're going to get to Adam's football takes, which you can get on his podcast at Establish the Run, and go over there. And we're going to talk about your draft kit and all the products. But I just, a lot of people have been following you. Like you said, you had a pretty big audience for a long time. And these are the questions that I, as someone that consumes your content, that I've always wanted to ask. So where are you from? Are you from Philadelphia?
No, I'm from Virginia, near DC, and I went to Penn State, and then after Penn State, I moved to Philly in 2004, and I lived there until about 2 months ago, and now I'm in Denver suburbs.
Are you a longtime listener of Howard Stern?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because obviously you've made it your fantasy football signature outro. You've said it all, and as someone that listens to Howard every day, I figured there had to be a connection there. So I like how you brought your two passions together. That's pretty cool. Who was it back in the day when you were still trying to gain your confidence and build your audience? Who told you had the goods?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's. Our generation is unique. I'll be 39 later this month, and our generation is unique in that we didn't grow up with internet. I didn't have a cell phone until I was a senior in college. I remember going to the library in high school and like loading up Prodigy to get on the internet to check fantasy basketball teams. And so it's a unique generation. Our generation lived through I think kind of a change in the way we looked at gambling. In other words, like, people from my generation, I mean, I couldn't even face pulling a slot machine or playing roulette or playing blackjack or anything like that. I think our generation is more thoughtful with skill games when it comes to gambling. And so you saw the poker boom, and you saw the boom of DFS and the boom of fantasy football. And so I think I realized quickly that there were a lot more people like me out there than maybe the old guard would assume, And so I think a connection with the audience by by just being authentic and being realistic and connecting with them on the things that our generation likes to do. It was pretty clear that I was connecting with a lot of people, I think, for sure.
You bring up an interesting point, and I'm not too much older than you, only a handful of years older than you. And we come from a generation where you had to pick up the phone to make a bet. And you would say 5 times. Remember that? You'd say 5 times on this team or 10 times. And that meant times 5, right? So if you were in a 5-timer, that meant a $25 bet.
Yeah. And I used to, even in college, I would use my landline to call for scores. And so there was a number you would call. You couldn't get scores really any other way. And you would call and you would say sports. And then they would say, what sport? And you would say college football. And then you would say, like Marshall. And they would tell you the current score of the Marshall game. It was crazy. But yeah, I mean, I remember that stuff pretty clearly.
So you famously have told the story many times about Establish the Run and how the name came about for the company. It's kind of goofing on the old guard, which is Establish the Run in order to better your game. So how did you decide on that name eventually? And what were a couple of the names that were pretty good that were on the cutting room floor at the end of the day?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. Every site is Roto something or Fantasy something or
right above
RotoWire. Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, those are great names for sure. It's kind of saturated. And so we wanted to do something different. I don't even remember what the cutting room floor ones were, honestly. I remember thinking that it was dangerous from an SEO perspective not to have Fantasy or Roto in the name, but we're not really going for an SEO play very much anyways. And we did some research and found that, it doesn't help that much when there's so many other, Fantasy and Roto things already out there. And so, yeah, I mean, the beauty of it is that people, even if they're like kind of old guard, they're like, oh yeah, Establish the Run. Exactly. That makes sense. And then like younger people and people who are in tune with it know that like, we're being sarcastic and establishing the run is like the worst way to try to win a football game. And so, so it kind of works both ways. And there was kind of the double entendre with establishing run in fantasy or gambling or whatever you want to call it. And so, I thought that it worked, but yeah, it definitely wasn't easy. It's harder than it seems to make a name.
Oh, totally. And I was one of those, when I first heard it, I was laughing to myself. I said, these guys have got it right. They understand the joke. Like I felt good because I was in on the joke early, but I know people that weren't, that were like, what the hell is this name? So it all did work out. And you were right. Good content is good content. People are going to follow along. I was always curious, what is your first nostalgic memory of football? Was it a game? Was it a video game that got you hooked? What got you hooked? When I talk about football when you were a kid, what's the first thought that pops in your mind?
Yeah, I don't know. Probably I was formerly known as Redskins, now Washington football team fan. And when the Doug Williams team won the Super Bowl, I guess it was, I don't know, 87 or 89 or something. I don't remember exactly. Doug Williams came to my elementary school and we all got to shake his hand. And I remember like one of my teachers like almost passed out from getting to shake Doug Williams' hand. And I was like, that's pretty crazy. I was always more into playing fantasy and gambling than actually watching games. I remember clearly playing the USA Today game, which I'm sure a lot of people my age remember, where they would give you the salaries in the USA Today paper, and then you would call in and Barry Sanders was number like 4142 or something like that, and you would say, I want 4142 on my team this week, and you would have to call back on Tuesdays to get the results. And so I remember all that. And the thing for me is I was never really that into just watching football just for the sake of watching football or caring too much about the teams. I was always kind of playing fantasy even from a really young age.
What do you think that the NFL, what rule could they change today that would just make the game better? I mean, you and everyone over at Establish the Run, you see the game a couple steps ahead of where it's going. I remember on your recent interview with, Adam Schefter, I interviewed him as well not too long before you. And I asked him, we had a couple questions that we both wanted to know. And it was, does the NFL know how important fantasy is to it? That was a great question that you asked them there. But what rule would you think that the NFL could change that would make the better game today?
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing they need to do is create a better watching experience when you're watching one game. Like, it's incredibly boring to watch a 3.5 hour game and when there's only really like 30 minutes of game action. I mean, there's so many stoppages and commercials. I'd love to see a shorter play clock. I think would be cool. Less time in the huddle. I think they've done a lot of good things in regards to the defensive rules. I think they should call holding less unless it's completely egregious. But yeah, I mean, in the long term, obviously solving like the concussion issue is going to be really hard. But, I could see in 20, 50, 100 years, the NFL, if the NFL loses its spot, it's going to be because of the health stuff. And I think they know that. And so I think they've done things, but it's going to be hard to keep the same spirit of the game and also have player safety in mind. So I'm glad I don't have to make that call, but I do think that's like the biggest threat for sure to the NFL's perch atop the sports world.
How do you watch football on Sundays? Do you have like Red Zone on? Do you have your phone in hand? Give me the whole setup. I love to hear how people that really watch the game and, I mean, I see you tweeting on Sundays as well. So give me the whole setup. Do you have your feet up? Are you drinking? Are you not drinking? What's going on?
Yeah, no, I'm just like so stressed. I'll have a lot of money in play on Sundays. And so I'm just like really stressed. I'll usually have Red Zone on one screen and maybe a game on the other screen. But really, what I'm watching most, which sounds crazy, I know people think it's crazy, but I like watching the word descriptions of the play-by-play. So like if you're watching on ESPN or CBS or I don't know, wherever it is, it'll say like Patrick Mahomes incomplete 12 yards to Mecole Hardman or something like that. And then say like second down, Clyde Edwards-Helaire rush up the middle 4 yards. And like I'm able to digest better because I can read all those as they happen. I don't miss a single play anywhere in the entire league. And to me, like how a guy looks or his talent or some spectacular play he makes is asking for trouble when you're watching games. So I try not to get into that too much. I'm so much more focused on opportunity and the way players are being used. And I think the words actually help me digest better how players are actually being used.
Yeah, you talked about that on one of your recent podcasts about preseason opportunity. For those who haven't heard that podcast, just give a brief synopsis why that's so important in the preseason. Because most people, it's easy to say the preseason doesn't matter. Obviously, that is not the truth. So talk about preseason opportunity just for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, some coaches will pull funny business, but the overwhelming majority of them are trying to get their first teamers reps like they will have in the regular season. And so if they do something like line Irv Smith up as a wide receiver in the slot on half of Kirk Cousins snaps, well, I think that's something we can take away into week one. If they decide that they're going to have Gio Bernard in for every single third down and Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette aren't going to get a single third down, that's something that I think that's going to carry over to the regular season. And so we get way more information and clues about how players are going to be used in the preseason than we do with all of this BS beat writer speculation that we get for 4, 5, 6 months. In those three, it used to be fourth, now 3 preseason games, we learn so much more because it doesn't really matter what the beat writers think or what we think. All that matters is what the coaches think. And so if a coach is going to use a player in a certain role with the starters in the preseason, I think that's really likely to carry over. And it's by far the best clue that we have.
I'm here with Adam Levitan from Establish the Run. You were watching the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, and we're just going to take a short break from a word from our sponsor. Okay, we're back. If you're watching on the live stream, you didn't have to sit through the commercial. So, and you know how that's done, Adam. Recently, like we just talked about a minute ago, you had Schefter on your podcast, but your podcast is not known for having guests. You guys drive you do the solo podcast, which is I think is one of the hardest things to do out there, is to keep people's attention when you're the only one talking. You do it well. You've really honed that skill. But if you do go to, there's got to be a wish list. I even asked Schefter that when I spoke to him. I said, who's your guest that you want to get on the podcast? Who's someone for you, if you could get anybody, doesn't matter football related or not, who would you want to interview on your podcast?
Yeah, I think Sam Hinkie, being in Philadelphia and kind of seeing how he was vilified by the public for doing what was so clearly right, to me, I think is really interesting. And he just strikes me as just an incredibly smart guy, not just in sports, but everywhere. He's recently, I believe, launched his own VC fund, and I've done some dabbling in investing in companies and stuff like that, and I think that's an interesting path to go down with him too, and applying the same principles that you would use in logic that you would use to making decisions in fantasy or sports or running the Sixers or investing in companies, and applying that to your life decisions, who to marry or where to live and all these things is I find interesting. And that's what I've tried to do on the solo pod. And I think, people connect with the solo pod because they don't really, everybody I know thinks about every decision in life as an EV calculation. And it's a tough way to live. I don't know if it's the best way to live, but it's like the only way that kind of we know how. And so to think of everything like, should I mow the lawn now, or should I pay someone to do it? Or should I go play catch with my kid? Or should I grind this showdown slate? Like these are all like decisions that are in my head, at least, EV calculations. And so that wouldn't, it's not a great way to live, but I think that's the way Sam Hinkie lives also. And so I think I would like to have him for sure.
Yeah, the definition of life is trading time for money. You're either putting money towards it or you're taking time towards it. And I was going to make the easy joke saying that thank God that my wife didn't use the PSM model when she's calculating to marry me. I might have been in trouble. But so you talked about on your podcast that you have over 40 season-long props. Which one is the one that you're rooting for the most?
Oh man, there's so many, there's caps on all these, obviously. And so if anybody who's bet props knows that you can't get a lot of money down. It's not like a week one game. You can't just get whatever you want down. So I have pretty much the same amount on all of them. And so I'm not really rooting for one over the other. A couple of them are looking good already. The T.Y. Hilton unders are looking good. He's already hurt. Have Rashad Perriman unders, and he got cut. He needs to play a snap at least for the bet to have action. And so yeah, there's one that I actually did get a lot on was when Carson Wentz got hurt and it sounded like it was bad. I ended up getting a lot against the Colts, and now it looks like Carson Wentz is going to be back week one, which kind of sucks. But yeah, obviously you're able to get way more down on stuff like bet against Colts win total or bet against Colts in week one and week two than you are on the props.
One of your signature columns, which is my favorite, is called Abusing the Rankings. And this is where, I think I was kind of like subconsciously doing this a little bit, but you actually marketed it properly, and just explained to everyone briefly what it is and why it's an important column they should read over Establish the Run.
Yeah, most people that we draft against are showing up with nothing except a few thoughts in their head about players, and so they're going to lean on the rankings in the applet. If you're playing on ESPN or Yahoo or CBS or Sleeper, NFL, wherever you're playing, they're going to have default rankings in there. And these rankings, in my opinion, are just absolutely egregious. But people are going to use them as the Bible. Like, if one guy that doesn't matter what we have at Established Run or whatever, like if we have a guy 20 spots ahead, but he's 20 spots behind in ESPN's default ranks, like people are going to lean away from that guy. They're going to be afraid to take him. And so just being aware of where guys are in the default ranks is huge. And also, being able to scroll down, it gets to round 11. There's guys ranked, 250th on ESPN that we have in the top 100, and so if you're willing to scroll down to 250 and take a guy, you can get him later, but you should still be aware to scroll down that he's there. And just, I would just encourage people massively, don't use the default rankings as a crutch, and be aware that our opponents are almost certainly using the default rankings as a crutch.
Yeah, because a lot of those default rankings will also take into account some of the mock drafts where people just walk in, select Tim Tebow in the first round and walk out, and things like that. When you go into what you call full virgin mode, it doesn't matter how many times you talk about that. Like I still laugh. Like it's just like at Howard Stern, there's certain jokes he talks about that like doesn't matter how many times he abuses it. So when you go into full virgin mode and you're in like DFS mode, what is your sleep schedule like? And I know that question sounds familiar because you asked Schefter that question, but what is your sleep schedule like?
Yeah. I actually have done a reasonable amount of research on sleep, and it's, you're just torching EV if you're not sleeping 8 hours a night, like absolutely torching it, And so I really, really try to get a full 8 hours each night during the season. I don't, the way Schefter's living, I don't think is healthy for 99% of people. He is a unique
He's the
specimen.
Terminator. He's the Terminator, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and so I really think that one of the easiest things you can do, like the easiest life hack you can do, is like go to bed at 10 and get up at 6. Like, you know, it's not, or 11 to 7 or 12 to 8 or whatever you want to do. I think it's actually really, really important. So even during the season, you know, the season gets into a routine, like once the season starts, where it's pretty predictable. You know, what's unpredictable is stuff during the preseason, you know, like injuries and trades and weird things happening in the preseason. Games are happening at all different times. You know, the regular season is more of a schedule. So I'm actually more on a good routine once the season starts.
Well, I'm going to get you into some fantasy football takes right now because I don't want to keep you too long. We're here with Adam Levitan from Establish the Run. If who's a player that if everything goes right this year, who is it and what happens?
Oh, I mean, if everything goes right for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I mean, he would be a league winner for sure. I've seen him go in the third round at times now. I think there's reason to have skepticism that Jerick McKinnon is going to play on third downs and Darrell Williams could play at the goal line. And, you know, it could be not as clean as it seems for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but let's say it does end up as the third down back and he's getting 15, 16 carries a game for the Chiefs, and he's handling a large portion of their inside the 10 and inside the 5 carries. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire could completely break the game this year. And so I think the floor is lower than people realize on CEH, but the ceiling is probably higher than they realize also.
One of the signature phrases that you've used, you've called what's his name? Arizona coach, you call him a fake sharp, right? You call him a fake sharp. Cliff Kingsbury. Who's the most underrated coach in the NFL right now? So obviously Bill Belichick is properly rated. Who would be a sneaky good coach, the opposite of Cliff Kingsbury, where everyone thinks he's smart, but the sharp community knows he's a donkey?
Yeah. You know, I think the Carolina guys, Joe Brady and those guys, are doing a really, really, really good job. I'm not sure exactly what the community thinks of those guys. I assume maybe they think that they're already pretty sharp. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, when I think about the spot for Sam Darnold, like to go from Adam Gase and this Jets organization to Joe Brady and the Panthers organization and the upgrade in weapons and just upgrade in franchise overall, like I think people are going to be surprised by how well Sam Darnold plays this year. And so, yeah, it makes a big difference. I mean, much different than any other sport. Yeah, and Cliff, I mean, my God, you know, if it wasn't for Kyler, if he didn't have Kyler, I mean, Cliff would just look like such a disaster right now. But Kyler is so good, he hides a lot of the problems I think that Cliff has.
The only fairness to Cliff Kingsbury is that at that time, it was not a popular thing to just discard the first round quarterback that you drafted the year before and go for a quarterback. So if you're going to give this guy any credit, at least he knew that what he needed to survive. So I will give him that would be the only amount of credit. You're a DFS specialist. Everyone, I mean, you have season-long prowess. You know the dynasty game. You know poker. You know all these things. But DFS is really what you've sunk your teeth into over the last decade or so. Anything stick out? Any tips just that pop off the page for week one?
Yeah, I actually, you know, a tip right away would be don't start looking at salaries and stuff like that until you're actually ready to make lineups. And by ready to make lineups, I mean you have all that available information. And so between now and week one, there is going to be a ton of injury and depth chart information. And I think it's worth digesting all that first before you start making teams. I don't make a shell. I don't do any stupid stuff like that. I'm just accumulating information as much as I can. And then making the teams should be relatively easy once you have all that. You know, I think that people aren't, especially beginners in DFS, just aren't price sensitive enough. In NFL, we don't have to be as price sensitive as we might have to be in NBA DFS. But still, I mean, the difference between a guy costing $8K and $7,200 is just way more than people realize, and the ability to find upside on your salary, you know, each player's salary through your lineup. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I would say game selection, you know, going and firing at the Millie Maker, you're probably not going to have a very fun experience, and certainly really unlikely to have a profitable experience. You know, I have a lot of articles up about game selection. In the book, I talk about game selection. I'm actually working on an article over the next couple of days about exactly how I would if I want to play $100 on DraftKings in week one, if I wanted to play $500 in week one, if I wanted to play $1,000 in week one, how would I sign up for contests. Which contest would I play? And I mean, that's just everything. I mean, I don't think people realize how important that is. And so that would be another thing. But yeah, it's deep. And that's why I like DFS so much. I mean, I could keep going about DFS for hours for sure.
Yeah, I could see it in your face. I could hear it in your voice about how passionate you are, and obviously that shows up when you play and how you talk about it. My specialty is Dynasty, and it's season long, and I love best ball. I'm a casual DFS player, but so I want to run this by you. And if this is a total, if this is something that's been thought of by all the DFS sharks, just tell me. I want you to be brutally honest. Is something like taking in a showdown slate, say putting Justin Fields in your week 1 captain spot, because he's not starting. And similar to what happened with Tom Savage and Deshaun Watson, where Watson came in the first quarter and got a whole game's worth of stats. Is that something that's viable for Justin Fields in week 1 against the Rams? Could they pull Andy Dalton in the first quarter and then you're literally the only one that has Justin Fields? Is that a reasonable play, or is that just totally dumb?
I don't think that's a DFS strategy question. That's a question of how well you know the Bears. What do you think the chances are that actually happens? If you think that it's, I don't know, 2%, maybe it would be worth it. But I don't know. I'd be surprised if him coming in the first quarter was 2%. It's probably much less than that. So if you think it's, under 1% or 0.5% or something, I think it's probably a pretty bad thing to do.
Well, it's still probably better than my edge of winning, for me, winning the $1 million. Who's your I can't quit you player? A player where it hasn't happened a couple of years in a row, but you're not giving up again this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Mecole Hardman. I mean, Mecole Hardman has looked so bad, but man, he's 23, and God, the impediment to him really having a big role, or a reasonable role at least, is Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle. And so it's just, I know he functions best in the Tyreek Hill role, which he won't have unless Tyreek Hill gets hurt, but there's still other opportunities, particularly in 3 wide receiver sets. So, I think as you get to round 9, 10, 11, I still want to take chances on Mecole Hardman. And I was actually out on Mecole Hardman last year. So maybe that's not the right answer to this question, but I think with Sammy Watkins there, he was much more blocked. And this year, it's a different story for Mecole, at least in terms of opportunity. We'll see if he's actually ready to capitalize on it.
Is he featured in your favorite Flyers section?
He's in there, yeah.
Yeah, he better be, right? So who is, in the age of information, information is everywhere for fantasy football. I mean, the people that know almost nothing about fantasy football are letting me know who their favorite sleepers are, and some of them are not that ridiculous. What do you think the edge is in season-long fantasy football in 2021?
Oh, I mean, it depends who you're playing against. In some of these online formats, it's tough, man. People are very, very good. I think a lot of the online formats, it depends how good the default rankings are, and so I think that makes a really big difference. In home leagues, it's just, I don't know, are your friends paying attention? But is the average fantasy player, better now than he was 5 years ago? I mean, not even a question. I mean, it's massively, massively, massively better. So yeah, it's definitely getting tougher. And any game where there's significant money line, $50 buy-in, $100 buy-in is probably not going to be that tough in a home league. But you start getting into higher stakes, just like anything else. It's going to be tougher, and we just have to keep being better.
One of the things we do over here at RotoWire is we try to take a look outside the top 24 ADP and say, who are the players that could end up on the 2022 cheat sheet as the top 5 pick? Give me one player. We'll get you out of here after that. Who's the one player outside of the top 24 that you could see the case that's going to be a top 3, 4 pick next year?
Oh man, I actually have a list of this because I actually do this article every year. And Jonathan Taylor last year was just an absolute layup. And it's players who are being drafted outside of the 3rd round who actually have a chance to go in round 1 the following year, and just trying to get in front of them. And, I have a big list here, but I would say that the most likely one to me would be Kyle Pitts, because you see how Waller and Kittle and Kelsey get pushed up due to positional scarcity, and you see how much value an elite tight end has over the field when you can't really match it. You can't get it together in round 6, 7, 8, 9. You can't scrape it together off the waiver wire like you can at running back. And so having an elite tight end is so valuable in season long. And then Kyle Pitts, I don't know if he's going to be an absolute superstar this year, but even if he gets to 1,000 yards with 9 touchdowns and then he goes into year 2, that would probably be enough for him to be a first round pick, assuming Matt Ryan is still still has his arm attached to him. So yeah, I think Kyle Pitts would probably be the most likely this year of the guys going third round or later.
One of the questions I didn't get to, but I like to ask is what's the big reveal? In week one, we get the big reveal. What's the big reveal you're most waiting for? And I think you already answered it. You want to see if Kyle Pitts goes 8 for 80 and 2 touchdowns. Could you imagine what Twitter's going to erupt into? Or conversely, if he goes 2 catches for 20 yards, it's just going to be, well, I'm preparing for Kyle Pitts porn or Kyle Pitts war after week one is over.
Yeah, I have a lot invested in the Bengals pass game right now in best ball and stuff like that. I have a lot of Chase and Higgins and Boyd. I'm curious to see if the offensive line can make the improvements that I think they're capable of. B, if Joe Burrow is healthy, and C, if all this Jamar Chase rhetoric is true. I find it really hard to believe that dude who won the Blitnikoff Award at age 19 all of a sudden forgot how to play football because some beat writer said that he doesn't look good in camp or whatever. That is the kind of stuff that I really try to avoid. And so there's been a nice dip on Jamar Chase that I've been buying. And I think T. Higgins is a baller, and I think Tyler Boyd could catch 100 passes easily. So I'm really curious to see how the Bengals pass game comes out. I'm optimistic, but maybe I just have too many eggs in the basket to be pessimistic.
No, you make a great point, because I referee high school basketball, and if I don't do a game for like 2 or 3 weeks, I'm a little rusty too. I may miss a foul or call something I shouldn't call. So him dropping a few passes after not playing competitive football for as long as it was, I think that's forgivable too. Okay, I'm going to get you out of here, Adam. I'm going to do some of the plugs so you don't have to do them. If I miss anything, you could fill them in. Okay, Adam Levitan. Follow him on Twitter at Adam Levitan. If you're watching on the live stream, his name is right there, so you don't have to worry about how to spell it. You're going to go over to Establish the Run, and you are going to go check out their draft kit, which Adam always thinks is underpriced, right? That's what I love when you tell them that it's underpriced.
Oh, it's ridiculously underpriced. I'm still pissed about it. Yeah.
Yep. And that's the thing, is that I think that there's, like, when I was a consumer of content, when I wasn't creating content, I would get multiple draft kits. I think sometimes people think there's, they're promoting this draft kit, so that hurts ours. But I think that I wanted to see everyone's, all my favorite analysts. So if Adam Levitan, he was someone I followed, I got his draft kit. And if Matthew Berry was someone I followed at that point, I would go see his draft kit. I'm spending so much time and money in fantasy football. A couple draft kits, it's not going to break you. It's only going to enhance your experience. You would buy multiple magazines. Why wouldn't you get multiple draft kits, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I'm mostly joking, because it really depends on the stakes that you're playing. If you're only in one $50 league, obviously a $35 draft kit is a big portion of what you could potentially win. But
I disagree in the sense where fantasy players are the only ones that'll spend $200 to win 50.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of bragging rights, in the leagues,
yes.
and it's worth more than the monetary value, I think, for a lot of people in fantasy leagues, and so that makes sense to me for sure. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're playing any kind of reasonable stakes, I think our information is worth way more than 35. But is what it is.
I agree. All right, did I miss anything? Is there anything else that you want to talk about before I get you out of here?
No, not at all. I mean, we'll be grinding the DFS streets hard. We've been working already really hard, getting our projections and all our content ready for week one for DFS. So, most of us are DFS specialists, and that's where we put most of our time and money in during the regular season. And so, yeah, you guys should check out our in-season package if you're into playing DFS.
And similar to what a fighter does, their corner man would sit there and rub their shoulders before they go into a big fight. They just remind them, slip the jab, remember to hit the right. What's the last piece of fantasy football advice you want to give people before they draft this weekend?
Yeah, you want to think about what's going to happen going forward instead of what happened in the past. Like, we don't make money on people's stats from last year or the year before or the year before that. We make money on their stats from this year. And so I'm not saying we should completely disregard everything they've done in the past, because that's the baseline for what they're going to do going forward. But think about how things have changed and what they're going to do going forward, I think, is the way to be ahead of the curve.
He's Adam Levitan from Establish the Run. I'm Alan Seslowsky, and we'll see you on the next RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Goodbye.